Can anyone define a transaction? What are the properties of transactions?
Acid, sir.
What do you mean by acid over there, ma? Transaction access data using read and write operations. Okay, fine. Atomicity, durability, right? What about I? Consistency, isolation. Okay, okay, fine. What do you mean by atomicity? What do you mean by atomicity, ma? Can any one of you perform completely or none? Do all or do none? Good. The transaction either takes completely. Fine. Very good. Okay. What do you mean by durability? Durability? At least after transaction changes, what must persist? Changes must prevail after transaction. Okay, fine. So at least the basic you're able to give. Fine. Update the data after. How you're updating the data after every transaction, Anil? Updates must persist in the database if there are. Okay, good. Good. Okay. What are the different states a transaction goes through? What are the different states a transaction goes through? What are the different states a transaction goes through? If there is a failure, active, partially committed. Okay, fine. Terminated, aborted. Okay. What do you mean by concurrent execution of transactions? Concurrent execution of transactions. Parallel execution of a transaction. Multiple users can have access. Multiple transactions are allowed. It's not multiple users can have access, Janavi. Multiple transactions are running. Okay, fine. Is it advantageous or disadvantageous, ma? Is concurrent execution advantageous or disadvantageous? Advantageous. Okay. What are the advantages? resource utilization, throughput, improved response time. Good, good, good. What are the problems caused by concurrent execution of transactions? Reduce waiting time. Good. Dirty read, lost update. Phantom read, read write. Good. Is it like, are you looking at your material and telling, or are you able to recollect this one? Are you able to recollect? Yes. Good. Okay. So what are the topics which are not clear to you, Anil? Then okay, fine. Now, what are concurrency control protocols, ma? What are the two concurrency control protocols? It's not rigorous lock, ma. Rigorous two-phase locking. Okay, then we will start off with the next topic, ma. I think I've covered the basics of timestamp ordering protocol in the previous class. Only I will share the link, ma, Surya. I'll share the link today in your group. Okay, so the second kind of concurrency control protocol, ma, that was nothing but your timestamp ordering protocol. Wait a second. So right, this was what I was talking about, ma. So I've given you all the basics that are required for the timestamp based protocols. Again, I'll just work with the timestamp based protocols. So just I'm giving you a glimpse, ma. See, a unique value is assigned to each transaction that is coming for execution, which tells the order in which they have entered into the system. Okay, so a unique value is assigned to each transaction that is coming for execution, and it tells the order when they enter into the system. Okay. So see, each transaction is assigned a unique timestamp, and the conflicting actions, which are nothing but your read write, write read, and write write, would be executed in the order of the timestamp. Okay. And these timestamps can be used in two ways. The first one would be to determine the concurrency or outdatedness of a request. So whether it is before or after with respect to a database object on which it is operating on with respect to the transaction. So it is used to determine the concurrency or the outdatedness of a request. And the second one would be to order the events with respect to one another. So the timestamps are usually used for these two methods. And in a timestamp based concurrency control algorithm, the serialization order of the transaction is selected a priori, and the transactions are forced to follow the order of timestamps. So what I mean by this is, whenever I'm working with a timestamp protocol, try to understand more. So I say T1 has entered the system. T1 has entered the system at around 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Next, at 10:10, one more transaction has entered, and at 10:20, one more transaction has entered. So see, I'm working with this as T2, and this is my T3. So I've got a schedule. I've got a schedule S1 in which three transactions are working. One has arrived at 10 o'clock, the other has arrived at 10:10, and the other has arrived at 10:20. So once this happens, I'm trying to give a unique timestamp to each one of the transaction. So maybe the timestamp would be 100 for T1, the timestamp would be 200 for T2, and timestamp would be 300 for T3. Okay, so see, since T2 has entered after T1 has entered, the timestamp of T2 should be greater than that of T1. I cannot put this as 20. Try to understand this one. Okay, 1 second, ma. Okay, so this cannot be 20 and this cannot be 10. See, the ordering of transactions T1, T2, T3 is 10 a.m., 10:10 a.m., 10:20 a.m. So what I can talk about this is the timestamp given to this is 100. It can be your system timer, or you can give a counter. I told you in the previous class, ma. So that is the reason I'm making this as 200. You can make this as 20,000 also. It's up to you. But you have to give more timestamp than the previous transaction. That is the reason I'm just working with a simple value 100, 200, 300. Now, what will happen would be, this would be my older transaction. This would be my older transaction. The next one would be my younger transaction, and this would be my youngest transaction. So This is the transaction based on the timestamp. I can assume that this is the transaction which has entered last for execution. So meaning timestamp of T1 is less than timestamp of T2 is less than timestamp of T3. And that would be the execution process of the transactions also in order to maintain the serializability. Okay. And whenever you're talking about timestamps, you have got three different types of timestamps. Three different types of timestamps. Okay. So one is TS of TI. One is TS of TI. Then the other one is write timestamp and the other one is read timestamp. Okay. One is TS of TI, which is the timestamp of the transaction. So if at all I go with TS of T1, timestamp of T1 would be 100 over here because I've taken the timestamp as 100. Now, what is the write operation? When the write operation was performed with respect to the transaction, that would be the write. That is the largest value. The largest value. I'll just give you a definition over here. See, Amma, write timestamp of Q. The timestamp of the most recent transaction that successfully executed write Q. Or you can say the latest transaction that executed the write Q operation. And that would be the same with respect to your read Q also. The read Q also. And it is mainly used for ensuring any conflicting read and write operations because they are executed in the timestamp order. Now, whenever you're working with a timestamp ordering protocol, Amma, you have to follow these rules. You have to follow these rules. See, suppose a transaction TI issues a read queue operation. So suppose a transaction TI issues a read queue operation. If the timestamp of TI is less than the write timestamp of Q. What do you mean by this? I have read the value of Q before another transaction has updated the value of Q. Then TI needs to read a value of Q that has already overwritten. Because the timestamp of TI is less than write timestamp of Q. What I have to do? Since the value was updated, I have to reject the read operation. I have to reject the read operation. Hence, the read operation is rejected and TI is rolled back. Since TI is an older transaction, then the last transaction that writes the value of Q. That is the reason. And if at all TS of TI is greater than or equal to write timestamp of Q, what will happen? If at all the case is quite opposite to that of this summa, I will execute the read operation and set it to the maximum read timestamp of Q with respect to the transaction TI. So maybe if at all I say the timestamp of TI, TS of TI is equal to 100, then read timestamp of Q would be assigned to 100 because TS of TI is performing the final read operation or the maximum read operation. Hence, I can execute that particular read operation. Okay. And whenever the transaction TI issues a write Q, whenever the transaction TI issues a write Q, the first condition would be if TS of TI is less than read timestamp of Q. Then the value of Q that TI is producing was needed previously. And the system assumed that the value would never be produced. Because the write operation was performed before the read operation. Then what I have to do? I have to reject the write operation. TS of Ti is less than read timestamp of Q. Then the value of Q that Ti is producing was needed previously. Hence, I have to reject the write operation. And next case is TS of Ti is less than write timestamp of Q. Then Ti is attempting to write an absolute value of Q. So again, I'm trying to perform a write operation. Then what I have to do? I have to again reject because this is lesser than the write timestamp of Q. I have to assign the latest write timestamp. That is the reason what I have to do. Again, I have to reject the write operation. Otherwise, the write operation is executed. Otherwise, the write operation is executed. So that is the meaning. Now try to understand with an example over here. T1 is 10, T2 is 20, T3 is 30, T4 is 40. Okay. So R1A, W1A, R3A, R2A, and W4A. So initially what we try to do is read of timestamp is assigned to 0. Then what read 1. So the transaction T1 performed the first read operation. Now what was the timestamp was 10. 10. 0 is less than 10. So what I'm trying to do is update the value of read timestamp of A to 10. Update the value of read timestamp of A to 10. Now go with next one, T2. T2 is performing a read over here? No. It is after T3 is performing a read. T3 has performed a read over here. So R3 of A. Now R3 transaction T3's timestamp is 30. So R3 A is read at a timestamp 30. Now 10 is less than 30 is true. Okay, fine. So this is also true. Update the value of read timestamp of A to 30. Next again, is there any more read operation? Yes, R2 of A. Fine. So here, R2 is equal to 20. Is 30 less than 20? No. Then the read timestamp of A is 30. This way, you are trying to avoid the process and giving the proper read timestamp and write timestamp to a particular database item. Is it clear how you are working with this, ma? All of you? Any issues, ma? Please respond. Is it clear or any problem? Okay, so this is about your timestamp based ordering or timestamp based ordering protocol. Okay, now next we'll be working with one more concept, which is nothing but your validation based protocol. The next one is your validation based protocol. So whenever you're talking about validation based protocol, it consists of 3 phases. One is a read phase, the second one is a validation phase, and the third one is a write phase. First one is read phase, wherein you read the values of various data items and store them in a local variable to a particular transaction. So local to a particular transaction, right? The next one is a validation phase. Transaction Ti performs a validation test in order to determine whether it can copy to database the temporary local variables. So if at all there are any updations, any modifications being done to the local variables, so validation phase determines whether I can copy them into a database that hold the result to write that holds the result of the write operations. So what I'm trying to do over here is I'm just trying to validate. So it's like, if at all you're going for a shopping, you have taken some 10 items and you are given with a bill. So first, assuming that you are trying to read the 10 items, then looking at the prices of each of the 10 items, and if at all you feel that that is right, then only you go with paying the bill. So that is a concept of, you're just trying to validate it, whether the shop person has given you the right item and whether I can go with clearing the bill, all that stuff. And once you feel like you have validated the bill, then you go with the operation of paying the bill. That would be the write operation over here. So write would be if transaction TI succeeds in validation. Once you feel that you're being given a valid bill, then only you're paying the amount. So here, if transaction TI succeeds in validation, so this should succeed, then only the system applies the actual updates to the database. So once validation is being done, then only the system applies the actual updates to the database. And whenever I'm talking about these three phases, the validation based protocol will be having three kinds of timestamps. The first one is start of TI, the time when TI started its execution. Maybe it has entered the system at 11:45. So that would be the start timestamp. Next is validate of TI, the time when TI finished the read phase and started its validation. So it's the beginning of the validation state. Okay, and the next would be finish of TI. Finish would be the time when TI finished its write phase. So you're not working with write TI over here. Rather than using write TI, you're going with something called as finish of TI. Finish of TI. Okay. So whenever there are two transactions, TI and TJ, if finish of TI is less than start of TJ, will there be any problem? If finish of TI is less than start of TJ, maybe TI has entered the system at 10:20. It completed all its work within half an hour, and 10:15 it exited. Now 10:50 it exited. Now 10:52, the start of one more transaction is occurring. So what will happen? The serializability order is obviously maintained over there. Finish of TI is less than start of TJ. Since TI completes its execution before TJ started, the serializability order is indeed maintained. So there's no issues with the serializability order. And if start of TJ is less than finish of TI is less than validation of TJ. So I need to check three conditions. Start of TJ is less than finish of TI is less than validation of TJ. Then the validation phase of TJ should occur after TI finishes. So if at all this happens, then the validation phase of TJ should occur after TI finishes. Then there would be no problem with respect to the transactions in a schedule. Okay, take an example over here. So see here, Amma, I'm working with an example. So there's something called a transaction T1, transaction T2, and obviously TS of T1 is less than TS of T2. The timestamp of T1 is less than timestamp of T2. That is given to you. Now, T1 performs a read B operation Here also I perform a read B. Then maybe I'm working with write B, B is equal to B minus 50 without applying any kind of locking protocols. Performing read A operation, A is equal to A plus 50, read A. And here I'm trying to validate. Display A plus B. And then validate with respect to transaction T2. And after validating, I'm working with write A and write B. So is it a problem that is being occurring, or is there no problem that is being occurring? Yes, is there a problem with the transaction over here? Is there any problem with the transactions? Just wait a second. I'll get that into complete one page. Right, ma. Is there any problem with this particular transaction? What I told you? Firstly, finish TI is less than start of TJ. Is the first condition satisfied? No. Since T1 completed over here, but T2 started before TI completed. Now start of TJ is less than finish of TI. Where is the start of TJ? Here, sorry. Start of TJ is less than finish of TI. Is it true? Yes. T2 is starting before T1 finishes, less than validation of TJ. Yes or no? Is finish of TI less than validation of TJ? Yes. Here it is the finish of TI. This is the validate with respect to TJ. So the validation phase of TJ should occur after TI. Fine. Finishes. So this is the end of my T1 and validation occurs after TI finishes. Hence, I do not have any problem over here. Okay. So this is about your validation based protocols. Is it clear? You have any issues, ma? Is it clear or any problem with validation based protocols? You have to look for the starting times, you have to look for the finishing times, and you have to look for the validation times, ma. These are the three things what you have to take care of. These are the three things what you have to take care of. What about others? Any problems? Yes, ma, any issues? Okay. Now the next one is multiple granularity locking, ma. The next one is multiple granularity locking. So until now, how we were locking the database items, can any one of you tell me? Before we actually start with multiple granularity, I would want you people to answer how we were locking the items as of now. How we were locking the items? Any one of you please respond. How we were locking the items? Because again, the concept is based on locking only, Amma. Multiple granularity locking. How we were locking the items? Based on transactions in the sense, ma. This is also with respect to transactions only. Exclusive lock and shared lock with respect to what? Exclusive lock and shared lock with respect to what? Schedules. What I was locking, ma, I was locking database items, right? Is it right or not? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like that. The variable A, the variable B, all that stuff I was locking. Yes or no? Yes. Okay. So was I locking a single database item or was I locking a bunch of data items, ma? I was locking a single database object, right or wrong? Single. Good, Surya. Okay. Single at a time. Fine. Now, what I'm trying to do with respect to multiple granularity locking, try to understand. So, firstly, what I mean by granularity. Wait a second, ma. 1 second. Yes, ma. Sorry. Now, see, I hope you can see the screen. Okay. So, granularity is the size of the data item allowed to be locked. Okay. Granularity is the size of the data item that can be allowed to lock. And multiple granularity means hierarchically breaking up the database. Hierarchically breaking up the database. So what I'm trying to do over here is I'm trying to create a hierarchy. It's kind of a tree-like structure into blocks which can be locked and can be tracked. So database can be divided into blocks which can be locked. Okay. And such a hierarchy can be represented graphically as a tree. So whenever I'm talking about hierarchy, I am going with the concept of a tree and I'm trying to lock the blocks. So for example, of multiple granularity, Okay, consider a tree. Here I'm working with 4 levels of nodes, wherein the highest level specifies the complete database. Highest level completely defines the database. And the next level, which is the child level of this, would be consisting of areas of that particular database. I'm working with the areas of that particular database. So here I'm working with 2 areas. The database is divided into 2 areas, area 1, area 2. And each area is divided into files. Each area is divided into files. And a particular file cannot be under 2 different areas over here. Try to understand that. DB, database, is divided into area 1, area 2. Area is divided into a file. And file obviously consists of records. File obviously consists of your records. So this is the concept of your multiple granularity. Creation of the tree. Okay. So try to understand over here. The highest level represents the entire database. Maybe it might be related to your company. It might be related to your project, all that stuff. Below it are nodes of type area, wherein the database consists of exactly these areas. So the complete database is divided into exactly these areas. Area has got child nodes, which are called files. Every area has those files that are its child nodes. And no file can span more than one area. That is what I have clearly mentioned. Okay. Finally, each file has child nodes, which are called as records. Each file has called child nodes, which are called records. Okay. And the levels that are starting from the top level are database, area, file, and record. So these are the things. This is the basic of your multiple granularity. Now the next would be, so again the same story, and whenever we are working with the concept of multiple granularity, as we have done in two-phase locking protocol, we can use the concept of your shared lock as well as your exclusive lock. When a transaction locks a node, okay, when I want to lock a particular node, it can be FA, it can be RA, it can be A1, or it can be the complete database. Now, whenever a transaction locks a node in either a shared mode or an exclusive mode, the transaction also implicitly locks all its descendants. So if at all the transaction is locking FA, then this and this would also be locked in indirectly. So my transaction TI is locking FA. Maybe it requires the services of FA. Then implicitly these two records, whichever I've taken over here, RA1 and RAN, so on, would also be locked in the same lock mode. So if at all I have exclusive on this, this would also be logged in exclusive. This would also be logged in exclusive. That is a concept. When this is the difference between your previous case and this particular case. This is the difference between your previous case and this case. Okay. Now, along with those two locking mechanisms, one is the shared lock, the other one is the exclusive lock. You have got 3 more locks. You have got 3 more locks. The first one is intention shared, which is nothing but IS, intention exclusive, IX, and shared and intention exclusive, SIX. Okay, so work with 3 more locks explicitly whenever you're working with multiple granularity. One is intention mode lock low. You have got intention shared. The next one is intention exclusive. And the last one, shared and intention exclusive. Shared and intention exclusive. So these are the three extra intention lock modes that are existing in your multiple granularity. Is it clear, ma? Is it clear to you? Now, try to understand what is intention share. Explicit locking at a lower level of the tree, but only with shared locks. So whenever I'm trying to lock a node with IS, the lower level would be locked with shared mode. The lower levels would be locked with shared mode. And whenever I'm trying to lock with intention exclusive, explicit locking at lower level with exclusive or shared locks. It would be with exclusive or shared locks. Okay. And shared and intention exclusive. The subtree rooted by that node is locked explicitly in shared mode, and explicit locking is being done at a lower level with exclusive mode locks. So whenever I'm trying to use shared intention exclusive, so at the topmost level, I would be having SIX. The next descendant would be shared lock, and the next descendant would be exclusive lock. So this way, you're going to work with these three extra locking mechanisms. I hope it's clear, ma. The 5 different kinds of locks. Is it clear or any problem, ma? This is what you have to work with. Okay, then you have the lock compatibility matrix, ma. Just go through this. Lock compatibility matrix, go through this for 2 minutes. This is what you have to remember. So you have to remember the compatibility matrix with respect to the 5 locks, ma. Now, what are the rules that you need to follow in order to work with this? See, transaction TI must follow the lock compatibility matrix while locking. So whenever you want to lock the database items, you have to follow the log compatibility matrix. Transaction TI must lock the root of the tree first, and it can lock it in any mode. So whenever I want to lock a particular thing, I have to lock the root first. Transaction TI can lock a node in S or SIS mode only if TI currently has the parent of the node logged in either IX or IS mode. So a transaction TI can lock a node in S or IS mode only if the parent has a lock with respect to IX or IS, not any other lock mode. Okay, so transaction TI can lock a node in X, SIX or IX mode if TI currently has the parent of the node logged in either IX or SIX mode. So here it is with respect to readma shared and intention shared with respect to intention exclusive or intention shared. Intention exclusive is compatible with intention shared. That is the reason we are working with the third condition. Okay, X, SIX or IX if the parent is currently logged in IX or XIX mode. Okay, that is a concept. Right, Mark? Transaction TI can lock a node only if TI has not previously unlocked any node. So the condition would be a transaction can lock a node if and only if it did not unlock any node. And transaction TI can unlock a node only if TI currently has none of the children of the node locked. So when I can unlock a node would be I do not have any of its children's nodes locked. So these are the 6 steps you need to follow. You have to go through this month, and in the next class, I'll be working with an example on your what? Multiple granularity locking. So this is the example I would be working with. So see, what is the problem with this would be if at all I have to lock this in a particular mode, maybe IS, I have to lock its parent, the parents of its parent and the parents of its parent. So firstly, I have to lock the root node, then the descendants in order to do this. Why? Because it wouldn't be accepted by any other transaction. It wouldn't be given access to any other transaction. That is what I have to do. So how we are going to work with this, I'll be telling you in the next class. You have any questions until now, Ma? You have any questions until now? Okay, so the example on transactions will be covered in the next class. Sorry, not transaction, multiple granularity, recovery and atomicity. Recovery and atomicity. What do I mean by recovery and atomicity? Right. So just see, what is the problem with transactions? Already you know, Amma. Modifying the database without ensuring the transaction will commit. So maybe I've got a transaction which is modifying the database objects, the database items. updating the database items before it actually commits. And once it fails, what will happen? It would leave the database in an inconsistent state. Okay, so I've taken the example n number of times over while I was working with transaction. TI transfers $50 from account A to account B. So the goal would be either perform all the database modifications made by TI or do not perform any one. And in order to transfer $50 from account A to account B, several operations may be required to output A and B. And a failure might occur once these modifications have been made, but before all of them are made. So maybe I've written the value of A, I've read the value of B, and there was a failure before I actually wrote the value of B. Then that might lead the database into a inconsistent way. So in order to eliminate that particular concept, to ensure atomicity despite failures, we first output the information describing the modifications to a stable storage. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to move the modifications to a stable storage without actually modifying the database. So it might act as an intermediate version. So I'm trying to move it to the stable storage. If at all the transaction has been successfully executed, then only I move to the database, or else I do not move to the database. And in order to work with this particular concept, we are going to work with one log-based recovery, and the second one is shadow paging. One is log-based recovery, the other one is shadow paging. Okay. So whenever I'm talking about recovery algorithms, what do you mean by recovery? Getting the database back into its stable state. Getting the database back into its stable state, if at all there is some problem. So these are the algorithms to ensure database consistency and the transactions atomicity and durability despite failures. So already we have seen a shadow copy, Amma, if you remember. In order to attain atomicity and durability, we have seen something called as atomicity and durability using the concept of your shadow table. Do you remember shadow table, shadow copy? Yes or no? In the beginning of the session, Ma. Did I cover that or no? I hope you remember, Ma. There was a database pointer which was pointing to the current consistent copy of the database. If at all the database, the transactions were successfully executed, then I move the database pointer to the new copy, or else the original copy and delete the shadow copy. That was one concept, Ma, which I have covered. Okay. Right. Recovery algorithms is divided into two parts. The first one is what are the actions that are taken during the normal execution of transactions so that enough information exists to recover from failures. So what are the actions that needs to be taken care of while the transaction is executing so that I'll be having enough information in order to get back to the original state where I started from. So if at all I do not have enough information, I cannot recover. So that is what you have to take care of in the first step. And once I'm done with that, what are the actions that need to be taken care of after a failure? After a failure, to ensure I recover the database contents to a stable state. This is the second part. Now, in that, I told you recovery algorithms. So the first one is a log-based recovery. The first one is a log-based recovery. Same. Here I'm just going briefly. Recovery and atomicity. To ensure atomicity despite failures, first output the information describing the modifications to a stable storage. That is what I've told you. Now, we are working with the first concept, log-based recovery. Log-based recovery. And in order to work with log-based recovery, you have to assume that the transactions run serially. The transactions run serially. Okay. Now, what we assume is, I told you I'm working with the concept of a stable storage. Stable storage is something which might not fail. Which might not fail. So all the logs are kept on the stable storage. All the logs are kept on the stable storage. And a log is a sequence of log records which maintains a record of update activities. I'm only working with the concept of update activities with respect to the log. So how do I register a log would be, whenever a transaction TI starts, I work with a log called TI start. TI start. So this is my log, TI start log record. I'm working with the less than and greater than symbol. In that, I'm working with TI start. So I can write this way. Whenever a transaction enters into the system, I say T1 start. T1 comma start. All that stuff I can work with. So this is my log record, which says that the transaction T1 has started. And before TI executes write X, a log record TI X V1 comma V2 is written. TI X V1 comma V2 is written. So if at all I'm trying to modify the value of a variable called X, the log record is written as T1 is the transaction which is trying to modify the value of X, and I'm working with something called as V1 comma V2. What I mean by this would be, what is this would be, now if at all I have V1 is equal to 100 before the start of the transaction. So what I'll do here with respect to the log would be T1 comma X comma 100 is the old value, 200 is the new value. So this is the log value I'm going to work with. So what way this particular statement would help me would be, so T1 is the transaction which is trying to modify the value of X, which was originally 100 into 200. So if at all the transaction fails, I've got the old value of X. If at all the transaction executes, I've got the new value of X. That is a concept. Okay, and the last one would be, once TI finishes its last statement, the log record TI comma commit is written. TI comma commit is written. So see here, ti x v1 v2 is written, where v1 is the value of x before the write and v2 is the value to be written to x. Okay, so these are the three things which would be consisting of your log. Sorry, which are in the log. And the log based mechanism is divided into two parts. The first one is deferred database modification, and the second one is immediate database modification. The first one is deferred database modification. The second one is immediate database modification. Okay, so both these things we'll be seeing in the next class. Until now, what do you mean by recovery and atomicity? What are the different ways in which you can approach this? How do you write a log? And what are the different methods you are going to use in log-based recovery? We have covered. You have any questions in today's class, ma?